Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar about virtual working. My name is Karen Plum. I'm AWA's Director of Consulting, and I'll be facilitating this webinar today. We're delighted so many of you could join us. We hope you can see and hear everything clearly. If not, please send us a message using the chat window. You'll be muted throughout the webinar. Hopefully that will make sure that we cut down on any background noise and things like that. So, today's session. This is our agenda for today's session. We're going to run for about 45 minutes. We were going to be kicking off with a session from Rob Briner, a professor of organizational psychology at Bath, but I think he's been a little held up, so I think we'll probably move straight on to our second speaker, Andrew Mawson, Managing Director of AWA, who will be talking about the issue of trust and managing trust in organizations today when people aren't always together. Our third speaker is Phil Makinson, who's joining us today from the Royal Bank of Scotland, very kindly sharing their experiences in equipping managers and teams to work effectively in the virtual world. We will take questions as we go along, so if you have questions, please do pop them into the questions window, and we'll pick up as many as we can either after each session or at the end just before we finish today's session. So, for those of you who haven't met our speakers, here they are, a lovely little rogues gallery, Rob and Andrew, myself and Phil. So delighted you could all join us, and what I'll do now, if you'll forgive me, I'll just come out of the presentation mode on my slide deck, as we'll need to go straight to Andrew's slides rather than to Rob's.
So good afternoon. Yeah, I'd like to spend a few minutes really talking about what I think is quite an important, increasingly important topic, which is the role of trust in businesses. And my basic thesis is that it's a pretty well misunderstood topic, really. And I suppose what I've heard from many organisations over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, often I hear people, particularly people in the human resources side of the business, say, well, we'd really like to introduce different ways of working, agile working, flexible working, working away, whatever, but our managers, they just don't trust people. And for a long time, I kind of said, well, that's, there's something wrong with them. Maybe they need some help on this. But actually, over the years, I started wondering whether or not they were right. And it occurred to me that perhaps they were, there was some foundation to what they were saying. So I started thinking quite deeply about what actually trust was, because it's an interesting concept, really, when you break it down. And so what I'd like to start off with is a little poll, which I think Karen will be able to administer. And the first part of the poll really is asking you the question, do you trust your partner? So Karen, can we have the poll, please? Okay, so if you could complete that, and we can just have a quick look at the results on that.
I think somebody's still wondering. Nearly there. That's it. Everybody's voted.
I tell you what, Karen, it's worrying to me that people have taken so long to come up with an answer to that question. But do you want to show us the results of the poll?
There you go.
So, hello. Who's this? So somebody's answering the question. No, they don't. So that's but overwhelmingly. Overwhelmingly, most people do. So let's move to the next question in the poll, if you wouldn't mind. And that is really the question, what is it that we trust them to do? I think increasingly there's a task element to this. So what do you trust your partner to do?
Nearly there. About 80% voted now. 90. Filling up. Somebody's still wondering about changing a tyre. There we go. Everybody's voted. Thank you, everybody. And there are the results.
Okay, let's see. So we've got a good response. Different levels of competence within the the partner groups. Do you want to just talk us through those, Karen? I can't quite see them.
Oh, sorry, Andrew. Yes, we have 91% of our participants have said they would trust their partner to look after children or paint a bedroom. 64% have said, excuse me, they would trust them to manage household finances or change a tyre, but only 27% would be happy to trust their partner to design an extension to their house.
Okay, so as I say, I wasn't trying to establish the competence of the partners of our audience, really more to just sort of make the point that really it's not just about, trust is not just about a feeling, but it's also, I think, increasingly about a task. So when leaders quite rightly probably said to me many years ago that they were interested in, they struggled to trust their people, it seems to me that they were talking about a number of different things at the same time. And so I started to think about the idea that perhaps what we were talking about here was a confusion, and that when people said they didn't trust people, they were talking about two things that were muddled up. So for me, this whole issue about trust, it needs separating, needs clarifying. So on the one hand, we have the perception that a person will act in my interest when I'm not around, out of my eye shot. And then the other side of the equation is the competence, and that is their competence to be able to work when I'm not around. And I think that's those two dimensions exist in the relationship between a leader and their people, and also to some degree, but possibly less critically, in the relationship between team members. So a little trick that we often use within some of our consulting work to get people to think about this is to come up with a little Boston box picture here and ask managers to put their people into 4 different boxes. So on the one hand, in the top left-hand corner, we've got people who are generally trusted. In other words, the degree people are, leaders or other people are comfortable that the person will act in their interests when they're away, but in fact they're not competent in being able to work effectively away. And then on the other side of the coin, we've got the reverse. So we've got people who are very competent in the job, but for some reason they've done something in their past to give somebody the impression that they may not necessarily operate within the interests of the person who is doing the trusting. So we've got those two scenarios. And then we've got people who are in the competent and trustworthy. So these are clearly people who we would be very comfortable to have worked away. And then we've got people in the bottom box, which seems to be an interesting group. So they're not competent enough to work away on their own, and they're untrustworthy. Now, they're either untrustworthy because they, frankly haven't been in the business very long and they haven't had much opportunity to demonstrate that they can be trusted, or there are performance issues here. So by looking at these 4 quadrants, it's quite helpful to get a manager really to focus on the true issues that he's facing, as opposed to bundling it all up and saying, hey, it's not really about, I just don't trust our people. So for me, trust is all about perception. The perception that a person will act in my interests when I'm not around and is competent to do so. And for us, that clarifies quite a lot of things in the discussion around this whole subject. But it does beg a couple of interesting questions. Should managers trust blindly? Should they simply start the relationship they have with other people by saying, I trust you until you have convinced me that you're untrustworthy? Or should managers seek some form of basis for trusting people, perhaps in the early stages of a relationship, being closer to them, having greater visibility of what they're actually doing? So you've got these things playing together. Now, of course, when we're all in the office physically together, we ought really to have a very easy and natural opportunity to get to know people and to be able to develop trust. In other words, to know the truth about the individual and the individual's context and what it is that makes them tick. So we ought to have that. But sometimes I think we don't take full advantage of what I would call the rich social suit that the office actually provides us with. So just an example, when I talk about the rich social suit, what I really mean is that we all share the same context. So here we are, here's a typical office environment, and people have got there. If you take today as an example, if you're in the middle of London, you will have shared an experience with a bunch of people about getting to the office, which was probably not the best one you've had, and you'll also know that in the same space it's warm, cold, whatever. You'll get a lot of information about people. You'll know the truth about people through the way they look, the colour of their skin, whether they're looking stressed, upset or whatever, or happy. You also get a lot of information through the network. People, tittle-tattle about different people. And even if you don't get that information from them directly, you do get it from their colleagues. So you have another basis to know the person. You also get a bit of support. And of course, you believe as a leader or as an individual, because you know everybody's in the office, they're all working hard, aren't they, kind of thing. So there's a bunch of stuff which we get, and of course this is an always-on experience, whereas when we're working with people a little bit more remotely, then we have a different kind of arrangement. So when we're working with people remotely, or when people aren't spending as much time together, particularly if they're not being so open and honest and socially comfortable with each other, then we only have a relatively small window. So if somebody's working away quite a lot, we have less time and less access to the truth about that individual. And therefore, to some degree, that limits the degree to which we can actually feel that we can trust. So when we're in the situation where people are working away, we actually have to start to manage trust much more effectively. So we have to take responsibility for the perceptions that people have of us. So trust management for me is the conscious act of managing the things that help people trust us. And it sounds a bit sort of contrived, but I think increasingly, if we are working away, we need to learn to do that, both as leaders and as members of teams. And what that means is that we have to manage people's perceptions of us, because the perceptions of us that people have a bearing upon how they feel towards us, the degree to which they will allow us to do things on their behalf, and the degree of trust they place in us. So managing those perceptions. Now, what can go wrong? Well, if people are working away, sometimes you'll get the impression that they're not where they should be. Here's a chap in a supermarket, he's involved in a WebEx call, and somewhere in the background you can hear a checkout girl asking what he's going to have for his lunch. So these sort of signals give you a bit less confidence that he is where he is. Another thing that can go wrong, little signals that give away, the person is supposed to be online, his diary says that he should be around, but actually he never is, and you wonder why not. Now, people who don't deliver on time, they say they're going to do something, but they actually don't. And a variety of these things, all contrive to leading to the sense that we're not trustworthy. Another one, you find things about people that you think they should have told you. There's something going on in their life, perhaps, or there's some distraction that they have which is having an impact upon the way they behave or perform. They don't answer the phone, and they don't get back to you in a meaningful time frame. They don't reveal their insecurities to you. They don't tell you when they're up to the edge of their workload. They just keep all these things secret because they feel by revealing more of themselves and their worries, that actually is creating a negative perception. So all of these sorts of things can give rise to a sense of not being trusted. Now, in many cases, the perception that you have of the individual can be erroneous. you can often find people who are very good at their jobs and work very hard are simply not managing these aspects that have an effect on the whole thing. And I think that's the key to it, is having an awareness and being in a position to manage those perceptions is the key to this. So for me, trust management is, I think, one of the critical disciplines for the 21st century, and that trust isn't simply between a leader and their team, but community. People generally trusting that each other is going to work in their interests and are competent to do so, and therefore are prepared to be open with each other and share their situation and their context. And I think by achieving that and managing those things that give us confidence in people, that we will all benefit, and teams can work very effectively. So the decision framework that I described at the beginning is part of that, and of course trust is only one of 9 factors that we recognise when we're working with clients to help them to improve in this area. So on that note, really, I think it's clear to me that when you take away the office, you need to put something back to make agile working really work. And I think when you start looking at some of the recent, well, not so recent, experiences with people like Yahoo and HP and 1 or 2 others dragging people kicking and screaming back to the office, then I think you start to understand why that's happening. Because in practice, I think large organizations have tended to be rather too blasé in just allowing people to work away from the office and work away from members of the team without putting back something to ensure that the cohesion and the glue and the effectiveness of those teams remains at the top level. And that's kind of a really important thing for us and for the movement towards more agile working. So I guess any questions on that before we kind of move on?
Okay. Thanks very much, Andrew. That's lots of food for thought. We have a couple of questions. Stephen says, if you don't trust your staff, doesn't that just mean you're a bad manager?
Well, I mean, I think in extremis that may well be true. I mean, if regardless of their competence and their track record in being trustable, you continue to feel very uncomfortable about leaving them to operate in a slightly more remote way, then yeah, I think you may have a few issues yourself. But in general, I think most managers and most leaders who are very good, and most people would understand what that might look like, are usually quite good at doing this. It's the ones that I think have grown up with in a world where they have to have their people around them to believe and to feel comfortable that everybody's working. Those are the challenging areas, because those are very long held and very well grooved views of the world and attitudes, and they often exist in some pretty senior people. Very much an old view of conventional wisdom.
Okay. Hopefully that's answered your question, Stephen. And Denise says, isn't it just easier when everyone's in the office? Don't we all have to work harder in order to be apart? Is it worth it?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it depends very much on the situation that the organisation finds itself in, the degree to which it needs those people together to fuse in some way in order to create whatever output is involved. But of course there's a cost to it. And the cost is a financial one. And if we look at a lot of the research that we do, obviously buildings are not the best utilized resources on the planet. They're very expensive, and they actually generate a lot of carbon. So there has to be a good reason for being together, and that seems to me to be the issue. If there are ways for people and teams to work effectively when they're not together, and it's cheaper and more effective and more sustainable, then perhaps that's what we should be doing. But only where we really need people to come together for a particular purpose, that be the case. And I think in today's world, with the sort of technology we have around us at the moment, and increasingly so, working away from each other for a reasonable part of the time is a perfectly reasonable solution, as long as the right disciplines and right understandings are in play to make it happen.
Okay. All right. I think we'll draw a halt to the questions there. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, and we'll maybe hear a little bit more from you later on. So thanks very much for your contribution. So I am delighted to say that our next speaker, Rob Breener, has been able to join us. I think he's been battling with a few technology challenges, but hopefully you're online now, Rob?
Yes, I think I am, Karen.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to you this afternoon, and I've got your slides teed up. I'm not sure if you can see them, but
yeah, I can. Yeah.
Great. So you just let me know when you want me to advance to the next slide, and I will move us through the presentation for you. So, virtual working, assumptions, evidence, and asking better questions. Over to you, Rob.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So what I'd like to do briefly this afternoon is just really examine some of the claims that are made about virtual working and a little bit of the evidence, because I think picking up on the last question that Andrew just took, I think there are a lot of questions around under what circumstances, how and whether virtual working is necessarily better than working face-to-face. And there's just, can the next slide please, Karen? And there's a couple of assumptions underlying the things I'm going to say, which is essentially that in the sense of evidence-based management, what we feel is that the kind of decisions people make, including those to work virtually or not, should be based on evidence. And the idea of evidence-based management or evidence-based practice in any field is that all practitioners, including managers, make decisions and judgments all the time about interventions such as virtual working. Those decisions are always based on evidence of various kinds and various kinds of qualities. Using evidence that's less relevant and less valid is likely to lead to worse decisions and worse outcomes, and using more relevant and more valid evidence. But it appears on the whole that practitioners in many fields, including management and including when it comes to virtual working, don't make the best use of the best available evidence. And if we have the next slide, please, Karen. So the principles of evidence-based decision-making are that you get different kinds of evidence from different sources. On the top left, you can see scientific research findings. On the right, we have professional judgment and experience of the practitioners themselves. Bottom left, we have organizational data. And bottom right, we have the stakeholders' values and concerns, which in any organization would include the employees and customers and so on. And what we do is we go through this series of steps in the middle where we ask a very precise question, we acquire the best available evidence with which to answer it, we praise its quality, we pull it together, we apply it, and then assess the kind of decision we've taken. And cover the next slide, please, Karen. What I want to look at just in this presentation is just some fairly recent examples of, I guess, some of the assumptions or judgments that some fairly high-profile people have made in the last year or so around virtual working. The first comes from February 2013 from Yahoo, and it was Jackie Reese's head of HRC, Marissa Mayer, sent a memo to people in Yahoo, and I'm sure some of you probably remember that. The second short example is from Best Buy, who ended their results-only work environment, or ROWE. ROWE, for those who don't know, means essentially results-only work environment, essentially suggests that the way you should organize work is completely around results. So where you work, how you work, when you work, and so on is irrelevant as long as it leads to the best results. And that's what they used to believe in Best Buy, and they don't seem to anymore. Example 3 is from HP. CEO Meg Whitman also made similar statements and issued a Q&A. So just as we go through these, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, and I'll recap it in a second, but just to see if you can spot some of the claims and assumptions made in these statements. Cover the next slide, please, Karen. So Yahoo, this is from their email, said over the past few months, we have introduced a number of great benefits and tools to make us more productive, efficient, and fun. We want everyone to participate in our culture and contribute to the positive momentum. From Sunnyvale to Santa Monica, from Bangalore to Beijing, I think we can all feel the energy and buzz in our offices. Next slide, please. To become the absolute best place to work, communication and collaboration will be important, so we need to be working side by side. That is why it's critical we are all present in our offices. Some of the best decisions and insights come from the hallway and cafeteria discussions, meeting new people, and impromptu team meetings. Speed and quality are often sacrificed when we work from home. We We need to be one Yahoo, and that starts with physically being together. Next slide, please. We're asking all employees who work from home arrangements to work in Yahoo offices. If this impacts you, your management has already been in touch. For the rest of us, who occasionally have to stay from home for the cable guy, please use your best judgment in the spirit of collaboration. Being a Yahoo isn't just about your day-to-day job, it is about the interactions and experiences that are only possible in our offices. Next slide, please. As you can see, there's a lot of assumptions there being made in this kind of email. And this is one response from Ressler and Thompson in an open letter sent to Yahoo. And they say, Ressler and Thompson say, "We are having a very hard time understanding how this will benefit Yahoo and how your employers can ever really trust you again. We don't think you deliberately meant to send a message to Yahoo employees that you are an industrial-age dictator that prefers to be a babysitter versus a 21st century CEO that can lead a company into the future, or did you?" So that's the kind of response, one of many, to that statement from Yahoo. Go to the next slide, please. And this is from Best Buy, also sort of following suit in a way, saying that the spokesman, Jeff Shellman, says, "Used to be a right, now it's a discussion for Best Buy," told the Huffington Post in an email, stressing that employees can still work from home with manager's approval. He goes on to say, "We believe in employee flexibility, but it needs to come in the context of a conversation about what the results are and how the work gets done," Shellman said. Next slide, please. So the third and final example is from HP, and again, I'm showing you these examples to think about the kind of assumptions in here. HP say in a Q&A session, "As part of the company's overall turnaround strategy, there's an effort underway to bring employees who currently work from home to work from the office. This effort is part of the company's cultural shift and will help create a more connected workforce and drive greater collaboration and innovation. In some major sites, there are a large amount of underutilized workspace, and we want to make the best use of our space. HP will maintain flexible work arrangement options, but with greater clarity and consistency about how to use them." And next slide, please. They go on to say, "During this critical turnaround period, HP needs all hands on deck. We recognize that in the past we may have asked certain employees to work from home for various reasons. We now need to build a stronger culture of engagement and collaboration, and the more employees we get into the office, the better the company we will be. Belief in the power of our people is a core principle of the HP way now. We believe the more employees we have working together, the better for HP and our customers." And just a final slide of this example. "We want to make HP a great place to work and build a stronger HP way now culture of engagement and collaboration. Employees who are more connected tend to be more collaborative, productive, and knowledgeable. They will also have a greater sense of the company goals and experience a greater sense of pride in HP. We believe that having employees work from the office will unite and inspire them to achieve higher levels of operational excellence and innovation." So next slide, please, Karen. So just think about some of the assumptions in what Yahoo and HP are saying here. So very interesting, I think, and very strong assumptions as well, very strong claims. They say collaboration and communication will be important, so we need to be working side by side. That is why it's critical that we're all present in our offices. So it's the idea that you can't necessarily communicate and collaborate virtually. They go on to say some of the best decisions and insights come from hallway and cafeteria discussions, meeting new people, impromptu team meetings. Well, again, that's a huge claim. Do some of the best decisions come from these kinds of discussion? And perhaps some of the worst decisions come from those discussions too. So we have to be careful about what's underlying this assumption. Speed and quality are often sacrificed when we work from home. Well, okay, maybe, maybe not. Being a Yahoo isn't just about your day-to-day job. It's about the interactions and experiences that are only possible in offices. So again, an assumption that there are only some kinds of interactions that are possible. Next slide, please. And this is some of HP's assumptions as well, but where is the evidence for this? So the idea is that bringing employees who currently work from home to work from the office will help create a more connected workforce and drive collaboration. Building a stronger culture of engagement will only happen and can happen better if people are physically together. Employees who are connected and tend to be more collaborative, productive, and knowledgeable have a greater sense of pride. And having employees work from the office will unite and inspire them. And what's very interesting, have the next slide please, about all these kinds of claims is one is from an evidence-based management perspective. Is there any evidence for those sorts of claims? So for example, to me it's an astounding claim to say that the best ideas come from impromptu conversations. I mean, it may be the case, it may not be the case, but it's a very strong claim. Also, even if there is evidence, how is this change going to affect employees? So if you work for HP or Yahoo and you're used to working from home, what does it feel like to be told that's not going to work for you anymore. It's not possible. Maybe you're attracted to work for those organisations in the first place because of the flexibility they offered. Also, certainly I'm a home worker, and I certainly wouldn't appreciate the accusation or implication of not being as innovative or productive as my colleagues who spend more time physically in the office, because that is the assumption, I think, in underlying many of these claims. And also you could say it's a violation of the implicit psychological contract. In other words, people have an explicit employment contract about what they give and what they get. There's also a set of implicit expectations. I think one of these that's violated here, I think, is around trust. That seems to be underlying this in the sense that people can't be trusted to work maybe as hard productively at home and come up with ideas in the same sort of way. Next slide, please. So this is just two examples. This whole kind of debate is very polarized. I think Andrew touched on this as well, the idea that virtual and flexible working is good or bad. I mean, it's a wrong kind of question in a way. One review by de Menezes and Keller in 2011 says this paper reviews the literature on the link between flexible working arrangements and performance-related outcomes. Taken together, the evidence fails to demonstrate a business case for the use of flexible working arrangements. That's one kind of view. And in the UK, the Department of Business Innovation and Skills in 2012 said there is evidence underpinning these theories of productivity improvement linking flexible working to enhanced employee engagement, satisfaction, commitment to other outcomes. So you get these very kind of diverse views about what the body of evidence suggests. I think there's a reason for that. If we can just go on to the final slide, please, Karen. And I think the reason for that is asking, is flexible and virtual working, is it a good thing or a bad thing, is really always the wrong question. We have to sort of think about, is it good and or bad, in which specific ways? So which kinds of outcomes or processes, good or bad for whom, good or bad over which kinds of time periods, and also what's likely to happen over time if you introduce or remove those kinds of flexible working. So for example, for you and HB, what do these U-turns kind of do? And also, is it good or bad where, in which sorts of context, good or bad compared to what? What are the alternatives? So if we don't do flexible virtual working, what are we suggesting? In the case of, I think it's Yahoo, they're saying, well, we've got lots of unused desk space, therefore we must fill it up, which seems a very odd way of approaching that sort of issue. And also, let's assume flexible and virtual working does have some good things and positive benefits, how can they be maximized? And let's just assume there may be downsides to it. How can those downsides actually be minimized? So ultimately, I think thinking about and practicing from an evidence-based perspective means looking very carefully at the kinds of claims organizations make about whether virtual working is a good or bad thing, and trying to be much more specific about the context and conditions under which it may be beneficial or harmful, but most importantly, looking first at the academic and other evidence that might support those kinds of assumptions and those sorts of decisions.
Well, a whistle-stop tour through those experiences at the various organisations that you were speaking about. Very interesting to call them out in a way on some of the things that they said. I have just a couple of questions come in. In fact, the first one's a bit more like an observation from James, who says, it never seemed like anyone wanted to have a dialogue about any of this. Decisions were made and people had to live with the consequences. Makes you wonder what's happened since and whether the desired changes have come about. Have you seen or heard anything, Rob, about what's happened since those diktats were put out by those organisations?
Yes, I mean that is a very good question, James, and one that's been on my mind for a while. I've been looking around and digging around to find any kind of indicator of what's happened next. It all seems to have gone kind of pretty quiet, and it does seem as though both of these initiatives, or all three of them, were introduced just without any particular consultation and just at the decision or whim of relatively new CEOs coming into those organisations. So my guess is that there's a lot of bluster talked about this, but my guess would be in practice things maybe haven't changed as much as those emails and memos imply.
Yeah, it's a lot of noise. It certainly attracted a lot of publicity to
yes.
it for a while, that's for sure. Okay, and in a similar sort of vein, Anna asks, in your view, how damaging is something like this to the psychological contract? Don't people just get on with it?
Yeah, I think it's potentially incredibly damaging. As I say, if individuals were attracted to go to those organisations because of the flexible working, because they prefer or like or need to work flexibly in that sort of way, I think to be told, well, that deal is off, could be extremely damaging. Now, I'm not sure how it's affected turnover in those organisations. My guess is some people would quit as a consequence of this, and certainly I think it would be quite demotivating, and also really say, borderline kind of insulting as well. If I was being told that I wasn't as creative because I wasn't having impromptu conversations, I might get a bit irritated about that and actually start asking questions about, well, how do you know that's the case? So I think it would have had quite a profound effect, but my guess is the people that really didn't like it have kind of got out, and maybe other people have come in who sort of did, but who knows, in a few years they might reverse this policy again and be encouraging people to work flexibly who actually don't want to now.
Okay, Rob. Just had another question come in from Gavin. Might want to bring Andrew into this one as well. It's just popped up, so I'm just going to read it out. Gavin says he's confused. Andrew says that with trust we should be able to work from anywhere. Rob cites a great example of corporate lack of trust. I'm guessing you and we are all home workers and know how effectively we work when at home.
Yes, I mean, I think I'll just pick up on that first time. Yeah, I think it is. I think these are very good examples of lack of trust, and I do think there is an issue there around why these individuals said it and some of the longer-term consequences of it. And there is a contradiction here, I think. I think flexible working does imply and does mean trusting employees, but actually, if you can only trust them by having them physically in the office, there's something wrong in the employment relationship anyway. If you can only believe you can trust people if you can physically see them, or they're sitting on a seat in an office, then there's something deeply wrong with the way you're managing an organisation anyway, I think. I don't know what you think, Andrew.
Yeah, I would entirely agree. And I think my thesis is that the reason why people like Yahoo and HP and others have come forward with this sort of rather sea change approach to the way people work is because they didn't put in place the things that you need to put in place in order to make it work properly in the first instance. And I go back to the issue of trust and also effectiveness, because there's no doubt, I mean, if you look at the way our organisation works, we have all of our people working at home, and that's our default. And when we need to get together to work on things, and there are things that we would better do in the same physical room, things that are complex, things that require a fusion of ideas, maybe drawing and sketching things out and all those sorts of things, then we bring people together. But in a sense, we started our business like that, and it's kind of our custom and practice. And we have a great deal of trust in our business, and we're also very good at, I think, having done it for quite a long time, understanding as individuals and as teams how to maintain trust with each other. And a lot of that comes down to social comfort and the ability that we have to be able to challenge each other and fuse our ideas and get things working while we're not all together. So for me, I think the Yahoos of this world, I've got it wrong, really. But on the other hand, if my belief, and there's no evidence to pick up Rob's view, my belief is that when people are physically together, it's a very expensive way of propagating, relationships, creativity, and all those sorts of things. But not everybody's working like that all the time. Even people who are doing things which are very creative are not doing it for all the time. And as Rob points out, the creative moment may come when they're in the shower or in the bath or on the tube. Going to the creative room in the building doesn't actually sort of create necessarily the moment for that creativity or innovation. So I think there's a lot of confusion around this, and I hope in some small way some of the things that we're doing are beginning to clarify, because I genuinely do believe that you can operate very effectively as a team without being next to each other in the same physical space every day. And this is being borne out, I think, by many organisations that are actually working quite effectively in this way. But you do have to put something back. And I think that's perhaps where we've got to in maturity terms, the recognition that perhaps is now the case.
So I just wanted to let you know about this research project that we are going to be conducting. It's very on the topic for this webinar. We're going to be looking at the academic research that's available to tell us about the best ways of building and maintaining agile teams. The research is going to be conducted with our partners, the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, and Rob Breener is a member of the Academic Council of that august body, so he's going to be involved in the research. They're going to be using a robust process to identify the suitable research for us to draw conclusions from in looking at the management and working of agile virtual teams. So once we have that evidence together, we'll be developing tools and guidance for the organisations that are sponsoring or have agreed to sponsor the research. If you'd like to get involved and co-sponsor the research, we will be delighted to talk to you further about it. There are some details on screen at the moment. I realise that you won't have very long to read those before I go on to my next slide in order to try to pick up some of the time that we lost. We are holding some briefings, online briefing sessions on the 22nd of May. We're holding 3 throughout the day. If you want to grab a pen and just make a note of the email address on that slide, or just email any of us at AWA if you'd like to take part in one of those briefings to find out more about that research project and get involved. Okay, so without further ado, and a little later than planned, I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Phil Makinson from the Royal Bank of Scotland, who's going to tell us about the bank's experience in supporting more agile teams within the business. Over to you, Phil, and I will just unmute you. There you go.
Okay, so you've unmuted me. Hello, everybody. Okay, this is going to be a very, very quick spin through given some of the technical challenges. So I'm Phil Makinson. I work for the Royal Bank of Scotland, and I work in the property department and have done since 2007. And I've been working with AWA, with Andrew and with Karen since that time, so quite a number of years. So do you want to spin the next slide, Karen? Yeah? Hello?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, yeah, oh, it's not moving on. Okay, there we go. Okay, so historically we started off looking at sort of driving efficiencies within our buildings and moving away from one-to-one, moving towards sharing space in offices in order to save costs. However, from sort of 2010 onwards, we've been very much looking at giving people the choice of when and where they work, so giving them some more sort of flexibility from whether it be an hours of work or whether it be a location of where they work from. This was an initiative that was sort of badged as the Choice Programme, and it's been sponsored by my director of what we call corporate services, a lady called Caroline Rainbird. And it's been delivered in conjunction with human resources and with our technology services people, because we've needed to involve a number of people in this project. So if you can just spin on the next slide, Karen. So I'll just let you have a quick read of the goals, but effectively we wanted to introduce flexibility in the way our people work, which not only helps to retain and attract staff, but it also helps our staff align their work patterns to their customers' needs. So we've been very much focused on when our customers want us to be there. Okay, so this sort of flexible working initiative had a sort of a massive support from our and from the senior leaders within the organisation, and we actually did a poll of about 15,000 people where we reached out and asked some of our members of staff what they wanted to do and what sort of flexible working options they wanted us to give them, and there was a sort of unresounding sort of vote for working in more flexible ways. However, one of the things that we appreciated was that we needed to sort of make our sort of middle managers more comfortable with being able to support people in either working in more flexible hours or working in different ways. So very much linking into what Rob's just said and what Andrew's just said about trust and about Yahoo and HP, etc. and stuff. We've gone the other way, and we want to try and support our staff and our managers in working in more flexible ways. So we've introduced a whole sort of a whole ream of sort of tools in order to try and help our staff and our managers find out about more flexible ways of working and how to support their staff in those flexible ways of working. So one of the things that we've done, one of the main things we've done is we've worked for probably 12 months on introducing a staff portal, so sort of an internal website, which brings together all the different sort of flexible working options that we offer within the organisation into one place. And it's aimed at, there's a number of different sections which I can appreciate you probably can't see from the screenshots, but we have different sections within this choice portal which support either individuals in researching the different flexible working options that are available. There's a section which is aimed at supporting line managers in managing virtual teams and managing different flexible working applications from their staff members. There's a section in there also which supports whole businesses where there's a business leader who's looking after 200, 300, 400 people who wants to bring in more flexibility within the whole of his business team and find out more about that. There's a section in there as well which supports people who've gone and moved to more flexible ways of working and helping them sustain the change. So helping them continue with the remote working and support of remote working, etc. And then there's a whole load of sort of tools and guidance notes and documents and different things that we've developed that support both staff and managers in working remotely. So this is just an example of your flexible working options page. So we've clustered the different working options that we offer within RBS into where you work and when you work. So where you work, that's sort of regularly working from home, working from a local RBS office rather than having to travel into town or into a city, occasional home working, permanent home working. So those are all the different sort of options that we offer from location of where you work. And then when you work, so as you can see, there's sort of part-time, compressed hours, variable hours, job sharing, and annualized hours. And if you click on each of those different images, it takes you into a page which gives you a wealth of knowledge around and support documents on how to work in these different ways. So this is just an example. I know it's fairly bare, but there's loads of sort of different pages down the left-hand side. There's hopefully you can see the "Is it for me" section down the menu on the left-hand side, and that's a sort of a questionnaire that staff members can go through, and they can answer certain questions with regards to both them as their personality, but also their role. And whilst it's not a yes or no answer, what it does do at the end of the questionnaire, it produces a report of things that they need to think about before they ask to work in a certain way and book in to see their line manager. There's different case studies with regards to people working in these different ways and how it's benefited them and how they work. There's a consider section, so that includes setting up your sort of home office if you want to work from home. What are the guidance notes that you need with regards to thinking about health and safety, information security, and all those sorts of things. So we've developed all these documents. So yeah, so then there's a choice for line managers section, as Karen has kindly moved on to, and this is meant to support line managers in both dealing with any applications that they get from their team members to work in different ways, but it also has a section in there with regards to how to manage virtual teams, whether that's virtual in working remotely, or virtual as in working different hours and what have you. And there's a whole host of information in there to help support them and give them some steer and guidance on how to manage virtual teams. So that's the portal. We've also, in conjunction with AWA, with Karen, we've developed some e-learning courses. There's a course for line managers, there's a course for staff, and there's a course for working in a flexible office where you no longer have your own desk. So we developed 3 e-learning courses which members of staff and managers can go into, dip in and out of whenever they want, and it covers, as you can see, all the different topics such as trust, as Andrew was talking about, communication and how to communicate when you're working in a virtual team, how to keep people motivated, when you're not presence managing anymore, so how do you plan and how do you manage people's time, etc., and performance manage people, and then again some help and guidance on health and safety and information security. So those courses are available for members of staff and managers to dip in and out of as and when they need to. We've also set up a choice community. We have a sort of a social collaboration platform internally, so a little bit like Facebook, but internally within RBS, where people can share their experiences. They can put on they can join forums, they can do blogs and all that type of stuff. And then final page, we also have an area which has been set up by our HR department, which is very much dedicated to virtual teams and remote working, and that gives access to all sorts of communities and shares benefits of remote working, and also gives links to different sort of webinar sessions like we're running today around leading virtual teams and building a sort of highly effective virtual teams. So those are some of the sort of tools that we've tried to sort of develop and introduce to our population of people in order to help them manage virtual teams and bring this flexible working within the organisation, because our staff are saying that that's what they want. And as we attract, new people, the different generations into our organisation, that is what they're telling us they want. So very quick, Karen.
Phil, thank you very much indeed. I've had a bit of feedback that your voice has been a little distorted at times, so hopefully the audience was able to hear most of what you were saying. Thank you very much indeed. I realise it's 5 o'clock and we really ought to be finishing. Let me just ask you one quick question that Frances raised, Phil. She asked, are you monitoring use of the portal?
Okay, we've linked it to Google Analytics, so we can tell how many hits we've had on the portal, and where people go, how they work their way through the portal, and what are the most useful documents that we've sort of embedded within the portal. So we can track all that, and we're also conducting, at this moment in time, because it's still fairly new, we're conducting some sort of face-to-face and audio feedback sessions. Okay,
that's great, Phil. Thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me now?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, before I go again, I would just like to say thank you very much to our speakers, Andrew Mawson, Rob Breener and Phil Makinson, for their time and sharing their experiences and thoughts with us today. Thanks to all of you for contributing. I hope you found it useful, interesting, thought-provoking, and we look forward to picking up with you if you're interested in the research, and perhaps having you on another webinar in the future. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a good evening.